1. Around 5 years ago, when I was in university, I worked at a local supermarket. Big chain, but in a small city, as a cashier to be somewhat financially stable. I didn't need this money to get by, as I lived with my dad, but it was nice having a tad bit more independence. Anyway, I was scheduled as the main cashier at the day before Christmas. Main cashier, as in occupying the only register with access to cigarettes and liquor. Where I worked, these things were locked up and had to be opened by the cashier. So basically, the cash register with by far the most people to work through. Being the day before Christmas, I already knew this shift was going to be an absolute nightmare. It was supposed to be from 12 to 10 p.m. So at this beautifully already doomed Saturday before Christmas, I came in around 15 minutes early, got into my work clothes, and went to the boss's office where we would get our registers for our shift. There was nobody in the office, besides our lovely deputy manager. She was the typical Karen, even the hairstyle was on point with a pink strand in her blonde hair. She can only be described as the most unpleasant person to work with, ever. She was always chewing the low-paid workers out, screamed at customers and workers alike. Only when the managing director was in would she act like an angel on earth. Back to this fateful day. I got into the office, kindly said hello, and wanted to grab my register. Before I could do so, the following conversation happened. "Before you go to your register, move your fat ass over to the beverage department." Roughly translated, different part of the store for all things liquid. "Mr. So-and-so wants to take his lunch break." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Now get going, fat ass." Good luck today. And with that, which I'm still proud of as a somewhat unconfrontational person, I threw my name tag on her desk, took off my work shirt, revealing my hairy 270-pound chest and totally sexy undershirt, and placed it next to her. After that, I proceeded to walk straight through the store to my car and drove home. When I got home, I already received 10 calls from her, none of which I have answered. Then I went to work and sent in my resignation. Not directly to the store where I worked, but to the big office, you know. I made sure to let them know why I was quitting in detail and how this person usually treated staff. I very quickly got a nice letter letting me know they received mine and that further actions will be taken regarding her. I still had some friends in that store who informed me about a week later that upper management paid a visit and interviewed plenty of people. I'm sure you can figure out how that went. Apparently, after all of that, the managing director gave her 2 options: quit and work somewhere else, or give up her position as a deputy manager and keep working at the store as a normal worker. To this day, she is working the register and occasionally cleans the facility. After all, the store is the only one close to where she lives. Oh, and by the way, she had to cover the entirety of my Christmas shift. Felt good. 2. So this is my dad's story, and so some details might not be exact, but this is in the 80s and not the USA. Some context beforehand. In my country, there are 2 types of police forces. The urban force, which you're all aware of, patrol cops, detectives, etc. And then there's rural police force, which don't do any of the duties like urban cops. Their job is to train like army soldiers and are responsible for keeping peace. When there's riots in the city, these cops handle the crowd management, and not the urban police force, who are still used but not trained to do this, so they go to secondary support roles in these scenarios. They also do missions in the rural areas of the region with military gear. There was a big issue with private militias back in the 80s. Their job is mainly to find these private militias operating in the area. These militias act like the government is not a legitimate one, and are trying to install private governments in surrounding villages and small towns. They attack or blackmail local representatives or government employees from doing their work, while blocking any building of roads or telephone lines. Long story short, my father's task force job is to patrol these remote areas and forests, based on the questionable info they get from informers. Luckily, if they find these people, ask them to surrender or a firefight ensues. Most of the time, the job is to search a specific area, ensure it's clear and move on. Things are usually boring and firefights are rare. The bad parts are the searching, the difficult terrain, and ensure that you are not caught in landmines and such. Anyway, most of the time one of the superior officers is sent on the missions. Most officers understand their duties and limitations that come with searching a big-ass forest. Every man is expected to carry their own gear, food, water, etc. Even a superior officer is expected to carry their own. They refill by boiling water from local streams. One time, they had the unfortunate luck of having an amateur arrogant officer. This one dude was on a power trip, and acted like he was above all and refused to carry anything but his weapon and ammo. Perhaps he watched too many movies. When the time for eating came, he ordered the men to share their food, or else. My dad and others had to begrudgingly share their food. And he also ate a lot. As he's not used to the exhaustion and tiredness, basically, he's dead weight and useless to them. The entire search mission, he annoyed them, micromanaged them. When my dad protested, he said, "I am your superior officer. When I order you to bring me food, you bring me food. I don't care how. Do as I say." My dad said, "Okay, you got it, sir." The next day, the task force is going via a remote village, and they made camp on the outskirts of the forest, just to avoid any eyes. If they stay in the village, the militia sympathizers will give in to the militias, and they will attack. So the task force almost never camps in the villages, not to mention collateral damage. Villagers also tend to be neutral and avoid taking sides, as working with either will bring the wrath of the other, so it's hard to find any food or shelter even if there are villages. As they made camp, the officer ordered the men to get the food ready. My dad and his small group of friends in the task force came up with a plan. Some villagers nearby had a shrine, and they leave food as an offering to the local gods there. This food is usually rotten due to being exposed to elements of nature for a day or so. There's stuff like fruits, some small snacks, etc. So my dad and the men went to a nearby shrine, gathered all the stuff there, cleaned it up with their water, and cut out any rotten parts and made it presentable. By the time the officer came back, they gave it to him. They told him their food was done, and this is what everyone was eating. He wanted to scold them, but he's hungry, so he didn't protest too much. As it's his first mission, he thought that's what they ate on missions after running out of food. He ate, and then slept while the men took turns for the watch. The next morning he woke up with horrible diarrhea. He couldn't move on with the mission, so they had to abandon their mission as per his orders and come back to a local HQ base. He never asked them for food on the next mission. No repercussions, as he couldn't exactly admit that he ordered them to arrange food for him. That would look bad in front of the higher-ups. Not to mention, the chain of command works differently outside of missions, so the task force didn't report to him at all, so their merits or promotions are entirely not on him. 3. This takes place back in the summer of 2019. I just graduated college, and me and two of my high school friends decided to move in together. We started looking for apartments and ended up finding one that was in a great location, in a big city, and not too far from all of our jobs. Well, we go to meet up with the landlord. I had to drive in from the suburbs to see the place, and the landlord gave me a temporary parking permit, very nice of him, to use since this area of the city is all permit parking. Aside from some squeaky floorboards, it was perfect. It had 3 above-sized rooms with a giant balcony, and we were the top floor, second floor. Overall, we were very happy and signed the lease that day. Fast forward a week from the signing, and we were beginning to move in. I still had to commute from the suburbs, so I loaded up my car with the intent of staying the night to move everything in. After all, I hadn't used the temporary parking permit the landlord had given me when we were looking at the apartment, since it was a quick 15-minute thing. Well, lo and behold, I come out to my car the next morning after moving in and see that my car has a big fat ticket on the windshield. I look at the ticket, and under the reason it states, "Parking permit expired." Now you might be asking yourself, "OP, why didn't you check the permit for an expiration date?" And that's a good question. Likely because I was in a rush and just slapped it on my car and didn't think much more about it. Looking at this ticket and reading more into the reasons section, I discovered that the parking permit that the gracious landlord had bestowed upon me had actually expired in 2017, which was 2 years ago. Now, I think to myself as a reasonable person, and if this parking permit had expired only a day or two ago, or even the day after I was given the permit, then I would have gone ahead and paid the $70 ticket myself. That, however, was not the case. And I wholeheartedly blamed the landlord, since I would have still gotten the ticket had I used the permit while I was seeing the apartment. So I reached out to the landlord and explained the situation, and asked for my rent to be credited $70, since it was his fault he gave me a 2-year expired permit. To no one's surprise, he refused, called me names, and said that his obligation to provide me a working permit ended the day of the apartment showing. Long story short, after some back and forth, he agreed to pay half of the ticket and credit it to my rent. Yay! Except I wasn't satisfied, and as a fresh grad whose job didn't start for another 3 weeks, I had nothing but time on my hands. So bring on the petty revenge. For the next week, I start plotting how I could get the rest of my money back from the ticket debacle with my landlord. But how do you get your money back and not get caught? My dear reader, the answer laid in the washing and drying machines. In big cities, it is common for multi-family apartments to have out-of-unit washer and dryers that all the floors use. Ours was located in the basement, not to mention that they're usually not free, as was our case, $1.75 per load per washer and dryer. Well, one day as I was plotting and shoving my hard-earned quarters into the washer and dryer, I had a light bulb moment. What if I could not pay for laundry? I would get my money back and no one would know. So I rushed back upstairs, did my research on how these machines work. When you select your washer and dryer setting, put the quarters in, and push the lever in, there is a switch that gets hit at the back. And boom, machine starts working. So what did I do? I simply looked up the serial number and manufacturer of the machines, called said manufacturer, and impersonated some random landlord, saying I must place my key fob for the safe box, where the quarters and lever are on the machines, and I would like to know the serial number for the key fob so that I could order a new one. The person I talked to didn't hesitate, gave me the serial number, and I ordered the key fob with expedited shipping off of some third-party website that day for $16. I was so excited the day the key arrived that I almost fell down the stairs running to the laundry room. And did my plan work? Without a single problem. I brought some laundry with me, picked up my washing settings, and then opened the safe box, exposing all the collected quarters, wires, and switch. Now, I could have taken the quarters, but I didn't want the landlord to get suspicious, so I decided to leave them be and just have my access to free laundry by pressing the lever and putting the safe box back on the machines. Now, you might be wondering, how much money did you actually save? Well, I kept track of every single time I used the machines. I wanted to know how much money the landlord was losing, and I wanted to know bad. So at the end of the year lease, I ended up using the washer 68 times, the dryer 70 times, and at $1.75 each time, it came out to be $241.50. You might be thinking to yourself, oh, P, that's only $200 or so. Couldn't you have done better? And you would be right. I did do better. I ended up letting my roommates in my secret halfway through the lease, and then ended up leaving them the key after I had moved out. Did I mention they stayed at that apartment for another 2 years? So, Mr. Landlord, you should have just paid the ticket. And before I go, just to answer some comments and criticisms I've had on this story. The landlord definitely owned the single washer and dryer in the building. It was not leased by another company. This was a 2-floor house. It was not a big apartment complex. He was not strapped for cash. He owned 7 or 8 other properties in the surrounding area that I knew of. Not with the prices he was charging for rent anyway. Was it petty? Yes. Was it vengeful? Yes. But it was from the PettyRevenge subreddit, so you know. Do I regret it? Nope. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Call me what you want. But I think you have to find a name to call the multi-millionaire, probably, landlord that's being a stickler to a broke college grad as well. I don't believe he had ill intent in handing me an expired parking permit, which was a day pass. He likely didn't even know. Like I said, I would have gladly paid the ticket in full if the permit had expired a day, 2 days, a week, hell, even a month ago. But that was not the case. 2 years is just willful negligence. 4. I was buying drugs from this awful woman a long time ago, and she was a pain in the ass. She would sometimes call me at random times and ask me to come over and fix her computer, or do some sort of favor. If I didn't comply, she would say that she was cutting me off, and I couldn't just block her calls, because she knew I was desperate, and she would sometimes tip me with drugs for helping her out. After all the time and money and things I'd been doing for her, she tells me one day that she is raising the price, and I told her that I simply couldn't afford to pay it, and she demanded that I always had to buy them all, or nothing, so I went from $300 every 2 weeks to $500 every 2 weeks. We sometimes compromised $400, but I would have to do extra work for her, like take her grocery shopping, clothes shopping, drives to the bank, and more places. I decided that enough was enough, and I had used my knowledge of how much she knows computers, which was very awful, and I knew that she spent a lot of time on certain dating sites, and I knew her username, and I took that as my main reason to prank, or to get back at one of the most awful and horrible women I've ever met. I decided to log in and make an account for a gentleman around her age, and I got the phony pictures of a man from a random website that had several pictures of the guy I chose. It had to be specific. The guy had to appear wealthy, but not overly. He had to have pictures of himself in different clothes and in different locations, and he had to have enough pictures just in case I needed them later. I made the account and used the filter to find her within minutes, and I told her that her picture took my breath away and all the things that she wanted to hear. It got to the main point of my plan, in which I spent a lot of time talking to her, and I tried as hard as I could to make excuses for why we couldn't meet up. Even though we lived within 40 to 50 kilometers of each other, I made her fall in love with a fake person, and during the time, I would sometimes unplug her Wi-Fi so she couldn't talk to him, and I told her that my fake name was John Withers. I had something very important to tell her. She would get upset when she couldn't log in, and she would call me begging me to fix her computer so she could talk to John. She desperately wanted to do video calls, but I thought of a plan that had to keep her interested, but also let her know that it was impossible. I took a chance and told her I was actually in prison for unpaid child support, and that I was getting out soon, and she bought it. She was madly in love with this fake guy. I know it sounds mean, but she was the absolute worst person ever. Anyway, I would always have a constant supply of the drugs, and I knew that if I gave her a day that I got out of jail, when I had no money, that she would ask me to drive her to the prison, as she wanted him to live with her, and thought they would have a great relationship. My plan worked out perfectly. When she first called me and said that she would give me a quarter of her prescription to drive her, I told her that I was working that day and that she needed to wait until I wasn't working. I wasn't working that day. She ended up calling me the next day after talking to John, and she offered the entire prescription of Percocet and said she would pay for gas and all. I knew that she was going to leave the prison sad and have a lot of questions for John. I was still able to talk my way into her believing the lies I'd been telling her, and I told her I was supposed to get out that day, but because of a technicality I had to wait another 2 weeks. And I did the exact same thing to her again without her even knowing. This happened back in 2007, 2008. I'm now clean and sober and have been for over 4 years. This woman took advantage of me at a very vulnerable time in my life. She herself has since passed away. People change. I'm in a much better place in my life now. And if you're an older person, you might understand where I'm coming from. 5. My wife and I bought our first house shortly after our wedding. Everything went smoothly, and we enjoyed our time as newlyweds. Of course, as the honeymoon phase began to fade, some minor issues started to emerge. For her, the first one was the typical guy on the toilet problem. So sometimes I spend quite a bit of time on the toilet. It's all legit though. I'm not just scrolling on my phone, I also do that, but I'm also doing what I'm supposed to be doing as well. Anyways, my wife started to pick up on how long I was spending in the bathroom and commenting on it. This was exacerbated with some unlucky incidences of her asking when I was coming out just as I was standing up and about to flush the toilet, so it seemed like I was just standing there until she said something and flushing to fake like I just finished. For context, I eat a lot. I usually eat about 3,000 calories a day, give or take a few hundred, and I'm a thin-frame guy, 160 pounds, give or take, and about 6'5". Back then, I was still getting used to the bowel movements associated with eating that much, and they tended to come at random times in varying amounts. My wife, though, didn't believe me. Her diet was much less structured than mine, and she still had no notion of what was going on in that room for so long. This culminated in a few arguments and her accusing me of wasting time in the bathroom on my phone, and myself insisting that I was indeed pooping. They were mostly joke arguments, but I really wasn't wasting time and was actually a little offended that she wouldn't believe me. So I decided that I would get a little revenge and clear my name in the process. So the next time I was in the bathroom, and my wife was in earshot, I began loudly announcing the following at the appropriate intervals. "Poop is currently exiting my butthole," shortly followed by, "Poop has finished exiting my butthole." I would do this 2 or 3 times for however long I was in the bathroom, during which I would be met with laughter or groaning from the other room, depending on how many times I had made my announcement that session. After a few days of this, she would get grossed out and say, okay, I get it," and I would stop. Since then, I have developed a much more predictable poop schedule, but I no longer get questioned as to my goings-on in the bathroom, behind closed doors. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 284. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do poke the like button. If you'd like to get the videos a little bit earlier, then you can do so by supporting me through Patreon, for as little or as much as you like a month. You can find the link to that in the description, near the Hellfreezer Teespring merchandise store. And you can also make donations during streams and videos like this one if you wish to do so. This is not required, but I do very much appreciate it. Alrighty, let's see. As there's no other business, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, do you read in the bathroom? I used to a very long time ago, but I don't now. I don't take my phone in, don't take anything to read, because I find it discourages me from spending too much time in there. They always say you shouldn't spend too much time on the toilet, it's not good for you. And I'm inclined to agree, like to get things done and get out of there as quick as possible. I'm a busy man, have things to do. Let me know what you think, if you feel comfortable doing so, in a comment below. And with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.